Okay, here we go. And oops, there we are. And my apologies. 1 second, everybody. I have just a little bit of touching up to do here. And there we are. Hey, everyone. We'll reverse that real quick. Hey everyone, and welcome to The Webline, a podcast about Spider-Man and his amazing world. Here we discuss all aspects of our favorite web slinger in a fun, informal, but informative forum. I am your humble host, the Spidey Librarian, and today we're going to talk about the most iconic and enduring Spider-Man stories over the 6-decade run of the character, in a segment I'm christening Spidey Reads. Spidey Reads will cover the stories from the comics that readers have loved, organized by genre, theme, and quality. I had the opportunity to hang out with my friend Dan Gvozden, one of the creators of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, and we had a chat about iconic Spidey stories, a few webtastic tangents, and our overall shared love for this character and his amazing world. I'll be playing that talk for you when we get to the main segment. I know you're going to love it, so stick around for a fun Spidey Reads discussion. I'm well aware that this topic may encompass far more stories than we can cover in just one episode, so don't fret if one of your favorite Spidey stories isn't covered in this episode, and don't be surprised if I label this segment with a Volume 1 or a Part 1 suffix later, as I may well revisit this topic in a future episode. In the meantime, if you believe a story not featured in this episode should be, just shoot me an email at spideylibrarian@gmail.com and I will consider it for later. But before we do a daring dive into our timely topic, it's time to dish on the latest Spiderific developments with our knockout news segment, The Bugle News Flash. All right, for our first news item today, Spider-Man freshman year is still in the works. We heard about this particular show on Disney Plus. It looks like it's going to be an animated Spider-Man show. It's set in the MCU, but it looks like it's going to be like a different multiverse within the MCU, because we have Norman Osborn in the mentor role and a whole bunch of other characters that otherwise I don't think we've seen in the MCU, or we've seen vastly different versions of it. Polygon Pictures, a Japanese digital animation studio, has announced its involvement, and they are clearly very excited about it. This is the first bit of news we have got on this show in a very long time. They have also released a logo. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's very different from the one that we have already seen, where it's written. It's the Spider-Man logo written on a piece of notebook paper. If anything, there's just less going on with it. Like in previous iterations, I've seen the logo plus like a drawing of Peter Parker. This is just the logo, and it looks fine. And they went ahead and went to the public and said, we're working on this. Here's the logo. So that's encouraging news. I know that we are in the midst of a writer's strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike now. Looks like all of the people that are working in front of and behind the camera are now striking against the network executives. So it may be a while yet before we get this show and many other kind of movie and TV or streaming productions. And I'm okay with that, but it is encouraging in the meantime to see an update on this particular show, which we just hadn't heard about in so long. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is, of course, even more likely to be delayed now. This mostly comes on the heels of the announcement of the SAG-AFTRA and writer strikes, but also it has already been discussed and just commented upon how little has yet been done on Beyond the Spider-Verse, and now with this added to it, I mean, personally, guys, I don't think we're going to see any of that show. I don't think we're going to see that movie until 2026 at the soonest. We will see. A little bit of pre-production has started, but so little that it's just not even worth commenting on. So, Tom Holland has actually spoken recently about not only his mental health, but apparently how he has recently gotten sober. Apparently, for a while, I guess 2022 was a very kind of, what's the word, boozy year for him, or maybe it was 2020. I don't remember. Anyways, he has essentially he's been sober for a while now, but was apparently not able to function for a while without a drink. And as someone who someone who is probably facing pressures that I am never going to understand, I'm not going to condemn the guy for having a drink or having, defense mechanisms in place to deal with it. But I am glad that he is getting the help that he needs and seems to be getting it and seems to be doing really well. So I wish him the best of luck, and hopefully we will see more from him again after the writer's strike and the actor's strike has passed. We'll see. And for our final bit of news, apparently Spider-Man is part of Marvel's Trick or Read event in October. They apparently are going to be reprinting Amazing Spider-Man 3, which features Tombstone. It's the Zeb Wells and John Romita Jr. comic. And apparently this is an event that takes place in October that is basically free comics to kids around Halloween time. So that one is going to be featured, and it is a reprint, so it's I don't know how strongly collectors will feel about this item, but I'm gonna probably try and get a copy myself, just because. So, all right, and that is all the Spidey news for this week. Welcome to the first edition of Spidey Reads, a none too formal discussion of the webhead stories from the comics and their influence on readers and other media. Spider-Man has over 6 decades worth of stories chronicling his adventures, and it's always fun and illuminating to talk about how the stories resonate with the popular culture in various ways. For this first installment, it makes perfect sense to talk tripped over my tongue there. For this installment, it makes perfect sense to talk about the most iconic and influential Spidey tales. And for such a discussion, I can't think of a better partner than the Amazing Spider Talk's own Dan Gvozden. Dan and I had the opportunity to get together and go over some of the big stories that came from the Amazing Spider-Man comics. What follows is a wide-ranging discussion covering the comics, the films, the animated shows, and our own impressions and influences from the media from which these stories grew. It was a truly wonderful time, and I'm grateful to Dan for being able to take time from his very busy life to hang out and talk about the big Spidey stories from that comic with me. We had a good time and about an hour's discussion, so enjoy the episode, and I'll see all of you on the other side. So for this portion of the show, I am really excited to introduce Dan Gvozden of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. Dan has very graciously agreed to come onto the show and just kind of talk with me about some of the most iconic Spider-Man stories. And I'd just kind of like to say at first that Dan and I go back almost a decade at this point. I started writing for his, I believe at the time it was Superior Spider Talk website.
Yeah.
And that was done in conjunction with his podcast. If you are listening to my podcast, I imagine you already know about his, but the Amazing Spider Talk, which that also went a rebrand too, didn't it?
Yeah. It was originally the Superior Spider Talk for about 33 episodes or so. And then, following that series, and then, I guess when we started, we thought highly of ourselves, in Otto Octavius style. And, we were the newcomer evil podcast on the scene, and now we are in no way newcomers, but and we didn't really know that we were going to do this thing. It was kind of an overnight success. Like Mark and I had no intention. I think the quote is, he said, if I'm doing this in 5 years, something has gone horribly wrong. And, so I think we just saw an opportunity when the book rebranded to go, wait a minute, why are we going to have people listen to superior spider talk when we could just be amazing spider talk? And the website, lasted many years under the superior banner, longer than amazing. I believe was a large portion of time where the website was superiorspidertalk.com, but when you went there, it said amazing spider talk.
Yeah, I
So,
remember. I remember there was a little bit of we'll call it cross pollination,
yeah,
but yeah,
sure, you
no,
can call it that,
so,
or you could say, like, I was learning as I was going.
yeah, yeah,
So much of what. Go
uh,
ahead.
I was going to say rebrands take time and effort and money, you know?
Yeah, they do. They do. And I was kind of building the ship while it was sailing. Like, I had never really, I mean, I'd done podcasts before, but building out like a website for people to write and multimedia, and then having to move all of that, I had never done anything like that before. So it was all an experiment, and I was really thrilled to have, like, what Tony isn't saying is, like, I just put a call out for people to come join me in this silly empire of, I thought at first covering Spider-Man comics when there were like 2 books a month, and then it quickly became like a whole line inside the Marvel line.
Oh
And I
yeah, there was
needed,
like
yeah, there
there
were so many B titles,
and I
uh,
ended
you
up
know,
covering I think Silk for most of my run on
yeah,
your website. But I also did a couple of articles. Like I think one of my favorites was I think the top 10 Spider-Man video games that were out by that point.
I
And
remember that piece. It still does good numbers for us. I
oh
will be
wow,
honest.
okay.
Yeah.
I will
Um,
probably do a podcast episode on that at some point, but
yeah.
I think for now I'm gonna wait until Spider-Man 2 comes out, so it'll be a few months. But yeah, I also remember covering what was it, Spider-Man Unlimited. And
Yeah.
do you remember when I'm sorry, when you asked for someone to cover Spider-Man Unlimited, and I said, "Are you talking about the animated series that didn't do so well?" And then you were like, "No, no, there's a new game." And I went and looked at it, and I'm like, I'll cover this." So,
Hey, I got addicted to Spider-Man Unlimited.
oh,
I gotta be honest.
that's
When those servers shut down, I was like free of like an addiction. Yeah,
oh, I'm still mad about it. I want that game back.
I know, right? I mean, it was a good game.
It
And
was.
anyway, yeah, I mean, so like I said, Tony came on, and like I didn't have any money, so like he was doing it out of the kindness of his heart. So like I think you even got some placement on some Silk Trade paperbacks. So like that's cool. You got your
Did
quotes
I?
pulled.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I mean, well, what are you gonna do?
I'm
But
gonna go
I
to
mean,
Google and find them
eventually,
now.
yeah, eventually it became like a little mini empire before it got shut down. But Tony was one of the first people to sign up for that silly experiment in covering comics,
Oh,
in a way
I
that
had a lot of
almost no
fun.
one does.
I had
So
a lot of fun, and you know, I was really honored to be a part of it. So, but yeah, Dan and I go back a little bit of a ways, and we occasionally reach out and contact each other and just kind of touch base and see how the other is doing, and you know, we even kind of ask each other. I'd probably do most of the asking for just insights and advice on doing things like creating content. So, but in today's segment of the podcast, we are going to talk about some of the Spider-Man stories that we believe are the most iconic. And I think for this particular edition of Spidey Reads, um, it's we mostly kind of went over the Amazing Spider-Man. So, uh, Dan, I would like I would like for you to start it off, and I would like for you to just tell me of the stories that you looked over, which one to you is the single most iconic Spider-Man story?
I mean, I don't think there's really any arguing against, like, Amazing Fantasy 15 is the most iconic Spider-Man story. Here's how iconic Amazing Fantasy 15 is. It has been adapted so many times that they didn't even need to adapt it in the MCU. They were just like, you already know it.
Yep.
Like it is so seeped into pop culture
Well,
that we're going to just assume your knowledge of it. Now, I don't know how great of an assumption that was, given that they then later kind of figured, well, we got to turn this series into a 3-movie origin story for this character. Eventually they ended up doing their own version of Amazing Fantasy 15
yeah,
over 3
they
movies.
did.
But like at first they were like, we're not even going to do the Uncle Ben stuff. We'll allude to it and you guys fill in the blanks, so I don't know if you can get more iconic than literally already in everyone's brain.
It is a
But
ridiculously famous story. I mean, so many people, even people who are not professed Spider-Man fans, they can recount the origin story in their, in their sleep, forwards, backwards, and probably in different languages too. That's how steeped into the popular culture it is. And yeah, no, I agree with you. That is, whew, that is one of those stories that everyone is going to know about for a long time. It turns out that, like, do you? This is a little bit of a tangent, but do you remember your first real memory of like Spider-Man at all? Like I suppose it's
oh
more accurate
man.
to ask the memory that got you into Spider-Man.
I have to imagine it was something to do with the 90s animated show. We're seeing I couldn't tell you the moment that I knew of the existence of the character of Spider-Man. I'm
I can tell you what mine is very quickly,
yeah, I'm
and it
yeah,
is very much about the origin story. It's from, I think, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I think it's like season 3, episode 8. It involves Mysterio has just like, they've fended off an attack from Mysterio. Aunt May is in the hospital. Peter is being all guilty, and this I think this is the point in the show when he finally tells Iceman and Firestar about his origin. And I could not have been more than, I don't know, 5 or 6 at the time when I saw this. And he tells pretty much the story of Amazing Fantasy 15. And I remember even as a young kid going, wow, that is heavy. And that pretty much cemented the wall crawler into my psyche as one of those heroes that I'm never going to forget. So yeah, you're right. That is an absolutely iconic and amazing story, and I think that is you know you can't ask for a better start than that to this discussion. Um,
I mean, you better hope the first story is iconic because that
hmm,
everything springs from there. So,
yes, indeed. One of my favorites to talk about. What This is kind of one of the stories that I go to when I'm convincing people to, like, if they're like, well, I want to read Spider-Man but I don't know where to break in. And this is probably not the best answer, but to me this is just like an amazing story because JMS is ridiculously talented, and sometimes I remember watching episodes of Babylon 5 and going, God, I hate this man, he's so talented. But it's the Moreland arc. It's the
coming home,
first,
yeah.
yes, and oh my God, is that a good story? Because not only does it call into question like the exact nature of his origin story, but he's presented with a foe that not only backs that theory up, but that he has to fight in a way that he has never really had to fight before. It's just someone who does not tire, and only by really thinking outside the box and embracing, his identity as a, for lack of a better term, a science-centered superhero, is he able to finally land a winning punch on this enemy and take them out. I really thought, I guess I really like our heroes being put through the ringer, and I feel like that was done in a very immensely satisfying way by JMS with that initial arc. What did you think of it?
Oh, I mean, that's one of my favorite stories of all time. They Marvel's not great about printing their old stories, like from whether it be in the middle of the run or start of the run.
I
They
work in a
tend to
library. I
reprint.
know what you mean.
Yeah, they tend to print a lot of the like Lee, Ditko, some of the Ramita run over and over and over again ad nauseum. And fair be it; those are classic stories. But if were it up to me, I would put Coming Home on eternal rotation. It's such a great, kind of, it's not self-contained, and yet it is. You could really get those. I know it ends with Aunt May standing over Peter's body as his
Oh,
costume is in tatters, and it begs you to keep reading. But really, that Moreland, remove that little tag at the end, and you've got a great, just standalone story that challenges the character's, place and introduces him in a new setting. Um, but the funny thing is, as much as that is out of print, y- you know, I must be the number one purchaser of this book because I have bought it for at least a 2 dozen people. I've bought that book for. Anytime anybody asks me like, "Hey, I want to read Spider-Man," I do exactly what you said. I buy a copy of that on Amazon and send it to them, a used copy. So like, I think I am like the largest market for Coming Home. Specifically, if you haven't read it, it's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, issues 30 to 35.
yes.
Um, and it's a wonderful arc. And I'm like, if people ask me like, I want to get into modern Spider-Man, I put them on that. I mean, like Dan Slott's run would be great too. The introduction to Horizon Labs in Big Time is
Hmm.
also a great place to jump in. But that one is a little even more steeped in like the complications of comics history and minutia and canon in a way that like the JMS run is not.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, whatever list we're making here, like Coming Home is a like, is it the best Spider-Man story ever written? I think I could make a pretty good argument for that. If you're looking for a modern Spider-Man story.
Hmm. And I mean, so much of JMS's run, I remember reading and going, "This is amazing. This is really good stuff."
it it's exactly what a modern Spider-Man, a modern approach on the character should be, and weirdly, it's become like modern and timeless because we're talking about a book that's 25 years old,
Hmm.
at this point, and I think is still. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of dated references in it, but it's become classic, and yet still feels like the freshest take on the character. Weirdly,
Okay. What about another iconic Spider-Man story? I guess. I
I mean,
guess. Oh, go ahead.
well, I mean, like in terms of iconic, like it has to be anything that's been adapted to the movies.
Hmm.
Like Spider-Man No More, all of
Mm,
Spider-Man 2 is that. So
yes.
like, the Raimi stuff is straight out of the comics. So like Spider-Man No More to me is, the next most obvious one. I guess Amazing Spider-Man 33, which is called If This Be My Destiny, has technically been adapted more than Spider-Man No More has.
Has
But
it?
I would say, yeah, I think you've at least got a reference to it in Spider-Man Homecoming. You've
Yes.
got it in the video game, has like the big lifting stuff in
Okay.
it.
Yes.
I mean, I would say there's elements of it in Raimi's trilogy, in bits and pieces here and there. But yeah, maybe I'm wrong about that. But I do feel like Spider-Man No More has the more iconic imagery,
Oh, yes.
that's
I would
been
agree.
reused like straight out of the panels. But yeah, those two books from the Ditko and Romita era of Spider-Man are probably secondary to Amazing Fantasy 15 in terms of like iconography.
I certainly remember Spider-Man No More like being adapted by Spider-Man 2, of course. I wanted to say, weren't there, and I guess this depends on whether or not you count media such as the cartoons and everything as well. But like, wasn't that adapted in any of the cartoons as well? I want
I
to
don't
say
know that
yes,
it's
but
been.
I'm
I am sure it's been adapted, but I can't think of anything that's like quite as direct as Spider-Man 2.
yeah,
You know,
I
like
would
we all
agree.
know the image of the costume in the trash
In the
can,
garbage can, yeah.
and someone's gonna scream at me right now that it's in the Spectacular Spider-Man show or something like that. You know, like I'll be honest, I've not watched a lot of that show. Um, uh,
Oh,
I know it,
oh,
but I would say I'm old, but I know you're older than me. So I
oh
just
yeah, that's right. I am.
happen to miss that. My hairline doesn't uh sells a different story. But um uh yeah, I don't know. Has it been adapted directly in that way? I don't know
I mean, the
actually.
thing is, I've watched Spectacular Spider-Man, and I can't recall. But
It seems
if
like something that show would do,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't think it did.
No, it definitely did a kind of condensed, here are some of Spider-Man's best milestones, and then it changed the order and adapted them for what was the present day then. But I can't recall that one. Oh,
Well, I'll say, like, if we use Across the Spider Verse as any, indication, like, what are the canon events? And,
oh
if
God.
This Be My Destiny is a canon event. So, like, it gets that bump.
What did you think of the concept of canon events being put into that movie? I know it's a tangent, but I have
Um,
to ask.
well, I have no problem with the idea of canon events because I think they're going to ultimately tell us in the third movie that there is no such thing.
Yeah, I
And,
kind of agree.
and I mean, it's spelled out pretty bluntly in the movie that like Miguel is wrong. Like whether he's factually wrong, he is spiritually wrong, right?
Yes.
Like you've got the parallels with all the characters, right? Like Gwen is confronted by her father in the beginning of the movie. We're going to get into spoilers for this movie, so
It's been over
um
2 weeks, people. It's been over 2 weeks.
yeah, I think that's safe. And the whole world has seen it by now for the most part. And if you're listening to a Spider-Man podcast and you haven't seen it, it's an odd Venn diagram. But
Okay, all right. I'm gonna take a jab and go. Says the man who has not watched Spectacular Spider-Man.
yeah, well, okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. I
um,
host a Spider-Man podcast and have not watched Spectacular Spider-Man.
if
My
you,
problem
oh,
is
go ahead.
really with all of the Spider people signing on to
Yes,
this and electing to be agents of destiny. I just don't believe. I mean, like it's clear why they did that with the movie. They wanted to elevate Miles as the protagonist, and
right.
but I think they regressed a lot of the characters in the process, and I think there was a better way to handle it. It's probably my biggest gripe with the film.
I don't mind it so much myself, but I also think that, kind of like you said earlier, I feel like they're going to course correct in the next movie, which is why I agree with I listened to your review of it, and I'm like, I loved it so much. I might have loved it more than Into the Spider Verse, but I don't think it's quite as strong a movie because it can't really stand on its own, and I feel like that is one of the big things that really does kind of like it relies so much on what has happened before and what's going to come after, that it's like Into the Spider Verse can exist on its own, no problem.
Well, thematically, we don't know what it's trying to say yet. Like you and
Yeah,
I could say like we think it's going to subvert it, and all evidence points towards that it's going to subvert what it's saying in the first film, or
right,
in this film,
right.
But we don't know yet, and the the idea that it comes out next year is ridiculous. So
Oh yeah,
I think we've got 2, 3, 4 years before we
yeah,
get a
there's already
conclusion.
been a lot
So.
of news about, yeah, that next year is not going to happen. I've seen it, and I kind of agree just based on everything I've heard. Like, yeah, no, this is going to take a while. Um, but yeah. Okay, all right, going back to the comics. um, Let me think. Another one that I really like is it's kind of a it's not even I don't even know if I'd call it a one shot because it's like half of an issue. But it's during Roger Stern's run. It's the kid who collects Spider-Man. I think it's like number what is it
248.
248. I like to say 238 for some reason, but that
Well, that's a
story.
good issue too. But
Ooh, yeah, that story really packs an emotional wallop in a very short space of time. And um I really was surprised the first time I read it. I'm like I can understand Spider-Man going to see a kid who is in the hospital. But I'm like, why this kid? And then he starts talking to him, and then like he takes off his mask and everything, and I'm like, why are you doing this for this kid? I get that, and then of course, in the final line or the final page and the final panels, they basically hit you with this kid has, like terminal leukemia or something like that,
yes,
and
that's correct. Yeah.
that he's not going to live more than another couple of weeks, and it, then you go back to that line where the kid says, "I'll keep your secret for the rest of my life," and it's like, oh man, why did you do that to me? But that's a story that's actually been adapted, I think, at least once, right?
Yeah, there was a version of it in the 90s show with young Timmy is replaced by a young girl. Um,
Yes.
I don't remember it being quite so blunt about her death, but it is there. And there's been a variety of different adaptations of that story. Yeah, that's a special one to me. It's one of the first Spider-Man stories I ever read, and
Oh,
I find it really
nice.
special. And Ron Friends is a friend of mine. He's the artist on that, and we did a episode fairly recently where I got the original script for that story from Roger Stern
Mm-hmm.
and the original art, the pencils, and had Ron Friends take us through it page by page how he constructed and adapted the script. So that was a cool episode, and I even have an art on the wall back here where I had Ron Friends drew a missing page from the story where Tim shares his comic book collection with Spider-Man,
Oh,
and
nice.
so that proudly hangs on my wall, and
Oh,
it's a cool thing. It's like page 7B is what he wrote, so
you have no idea. Well, maybe you have some idea of how jealous I am that you're able to say all this.
yeah, it's a cool thing. And Ron's a really nice guy, and you know, it's a classic story that never fails to make me choke up a little bit. And I haven't read it now that I'm a father. I've kind of steered away from it, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
I'm kind of like curious how it. I mean, I've read it so many times, but some pieces of art just hit you differently, different stages of your life, and so
right.
it's
Yeah.
nice to put them down for a while and pick them up and see what new insights or impacts it has on you.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know I don't I don't know if I have ever gotten to a point where there's a particular story that I, can't read or don't want to read it for um for life change reasons, but I certainly read a lot of stories and see things from a different perspective that I may not have appreciated in the past. And so I can definitely understand. I mean, are you I don't know, were you aware about the issues with my cat Trouble recently? She was really
No, tell me
sick.
about it. Yeah.
She was really sick, I think in February of this year, and we couldn't figure out why. And she very nearly died, and I had to put her in an animal hospital for 2 weeks. And
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, it was it was an emotional roller coaster for me. I don't know. You may have seen her in the background here. She's fine now. But
Yeah, I saw her on the back of your chair just a
yeah,
few moments ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, Trouble is she's an executive producer on the podcast. So, but
She just donates money and then gets to come along for the ride.
she does. She totally does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she and so when I was going through that, there were certain episodes of certain shows that I had a very hard time watching. There was a particular episode, I think, of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds where the Doctor character, you find out that his daughter has some kind of terminal condition, and he has to keep her in the transporter buffer and bring her out for 5 minutes at a time and stuff. And like watching that when like I mean I don't have kids, so Trouble is probably the closest thing I have to a child right now.
Yeah.
And so like watching that really hits hard, and I had a hard time watching any movies or shows like where any of the pets die for a while.
I get it. I get it.
So
Well, I mean, speaking of emotional resonance, like the reason I have a son is because of Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, there are other reasons, but like
wow, that is
that,
kind of awesome actually.
yeah, that movie, I go to the theater and I saw that movie 2 months before it came out, and by myself, and didn't know what to tell other people because it was like, did I just see the greatest thing ever made by human hands? And is anybody going to believe me that it's that good? But I had been wrestling with the decision to have a child for a long time. It's
Hmm.
not exactly a friendly world for kids these days or anybody, and
Yeah.
the future looks increasingly bleak, and there are questions about like whether or not you want to subject someone to that or whatever. But also, like, I'm a high school teacher. I don't make a ton of money. And, there's this idea of like, will you ever be ready to, take on that responsibility? And, um, whichever way you go, because I think it's a responsibility to either have kids, don't have kids, whatever. And, my parents had always told me like, "Oh, you're never ready. You're never ready." And
Right.
my read
Yeah.
on that was like, "Yeah, but I'm also never ready to get hit by a bus." Like that doesn't mean it's a good thing. Like there are better times to get hit by a bus. Maybe there's no good time to get hit by a bus,
Right.
but it was just not what my brain needed to hear in terms of like encouragement.
Yes.
Um, but then I saw this movie, and it had at its core. I mean, both movies are very much about parenthood
Hmm.
and what it means to like be a father, be a son, be an uncle, whatever it is. It's about relationships, and that's what makes them really strong, I think. Like they could not be about Spider-Man and they would still be wonderful. It just
Right.
happens to be about Spider-Man. And maybe that was the like sugar that I needed to get to take to swallow the pill, but like when they say the line about it's a leap of faith, and Miles is like holding Peter over that abyss, and it sinks in for Peter, a person who didn't want to have kids because of the responsibility and his fear of it. I was like, this movie is speaking directly to me, you know,
Yeah.
and I just started bawling in the theater. And I actually have like that artwork of that scene behind me on the wall because it means a lot to me, and it reminds me of that choice that I made and now have a beautiful son from. But it is amazing how much like art can really speak to you if you're open to hearing
Mhm.
it. And then in the sequel, of course, Peter tells Miles like, I had a kid because of you. And I
Yep.
was like, oh man, like that's me. Like, anyway, like
I imagine
we
you're
talked
going to
about.
be cosplaying Peter B at some point for a while.
Oh, it's perfect. He's overweight. I've got a belly now. Like, it's dad bod superhero. I don't even have to like. I can wear sweatpants. like and a superhero costume, it's perfect for
Yep.
me. Nobody wants to see me in spandex, but they'd be fine with me in spandex and sweatpants. So, like it all works out.
That's awesome. And you're absolutely right. And that's the reason why people, create content, make podcasts or YouTube videos or that they write or anything, because if it's good enough, if it gets to you at the right time, art um in any medium can be very life-changing, And so uh yeah, and I mean these stories have definitely had an effect on me and you, of course. I mean, I hope that your son appreciates how cool a dad he's going to grow up with,
Well,
So
I don't think he's going to think that, but I appreciate you saying as much. I just hope he wants to keep all of my ephemera because there's way too much of it, and he's gonna have to make a decision someday what to do with it. But for now, I'm hoping that he and I enjoy it together. They do print all the Ditko stuff, like I was saying earlier,
yeah.
over and over and over again, and I got a nice copy of them for him, and I hope that when he's old enough we can sit down together and maybe read it together, and I get to see it through his eyes,
Hmm.
which I think will be really fun,
Yeah, no, I think so too.
yeah.
You guys can watch the cartoons together, you
Yeah,
know?
maybe that's it. Maybe I'll finally watch Spectacular Spider-Man because of my son,
That
like that'll be the thing that gets me to commit.
I will be very excited if and when that day comes.
Oh, thanks.
I
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just that I started it, and then the show has me doing all kinds of other stuff, and so I never got back to it. And now I'm waiting for the season of our show where we're going to cover it. So I'm I'll just wait till then to watch it. So
That's fair. That's
pr-
completely fair.
probably a mistake on my end, but you know what? That's my rationale, and I only have to justify it to myself.
If as long as you can look at yourself in the mirror, right?
Yeah, well, I had trouble with that for other reasons, but you know what? If I can pin it on Spectacular Spider-Man, maybe that'll maybe
Okay,
that'll
that's
solve
fair.
some of my problems. Yeah.
So, are there any of the stories that we've kind of made notes about and listed that you think are iconic and worth knowing, but at the same time you also kind of might be like, God, this is hard to read, or I hate something about this story, or anything like that, like that give you a little bit of a conflict?
Oh. Well, that's tough. I mean, for me, I mean, let's go back to the Moreland saga,
Okay.
the coming home story. Um I think it's a perfect story on its own, but it also introduced the idea of totemic powers, which then led to the idea of the Spider Verse and the web of life and destiny, and
Mm-hmm.
all spider people being the chosen one. And that's not JMS's fault, but
Other people
I kind
piggybacked on
of,
it, though.
yeah, as much as I like the Spider Verse movies, clearly they mean a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't like the idea of destiny being attached to the Spider-Man character, which again, I think Across the Spider-Verse does that in order to say no, this is not something that this character should ever be associated with,
Right. Yes.
But in the comics for a long time now, we've gotten a lot of destiny chosen one Spider-Man stories.
Yes.
Even just recently we got the end of the Spider-Verse where Peter is literally called the chosen one, and I just don't think that that's a good fit for the character. I love a lot of the ideas of Spider-Verse and a lot of the fun of the original Spider-Verse, but I just don't like it as a Spider-Man story.
Uh-huh.
So I reread Coming Home and I love it, and I can divorce my mind from what came afterwards, but there is now, it is, I think, a little bit tarnished, by that. Even Moreland himself, a great kind of villain of the week for that story. Like, we never needed to see this guy again. And now he gets trotted out fairly regularly as a big bad. And, every Spider-Man villain is, kind of goes through this cycle of like, how do we need another Green Goblin story? Like, I thought
Right.
he died in the 70s,
Right.
It's just the part of that Spider-Man story never ends. And so everything gets revisited and in some ways tarnished. Craven's Last Hunt is his last of several last
I
hunts,
know. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so, and I think some of those are really good too. Like, I like some of the follow-ups to Last Hunt. Does it tarnish the original? Kind of.
A little
Yeah, I
bit.
can't I
Yeah.
can't deny that. So I don't know that like it like gives me any dread to read those stories, but like I do think like, well, like, for especially for Coming Home, I'm like, this is the thread that started the sweater that I don't like, that I think
Right.
is ugly, you know?
And if you tug on it, it all comes apart.
Yeah, perhaps. Cause like JMS ended his whole like run with the whole idea of this thing being like, and I won't go into the details of it for those who haven't read it, but like he basically like questions like, is it magic, fate, and destiny, or science that brought Spider-Man into the world? And his final declaration on it is, believe what you want to believe. It doesn't matter, And like, I'm fine with leaving it at that. Like, that's really a simple thing that I don't have to think too hard about. Like, for me, I like the science, but if
Hmm.
you like destiny, cool. Like, more power to you. It's just everybody that came since is like, no, actually, really what he meant was it's definitely destiny, like, so
And then you'll
anyway.
eventually get a team of writers that decide, no, 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 it's and like, yeah, it.
Yeah, I think some people do it better. Like Zeb's run right now, I really liked
Mhm.
what he did with this idea. Like, he put Spider-Man into like a world of symbology, and it tied totems in there, and it made it into like, like the spider is the symbol of, like weaving and webs, and so therefore the spiders are I was like, okay, like you're taking this back to something less concrete and something more like, oh, I could kind of believe it if I want to. And I was like, okay, like that threaded the needle better, without discounting all the stuff that Slot added and stuff. So different writers are going to have different approaches, and some of them are going to work for you and some of them aren't. Plenty of people don't like what Zeb Wells is doing. So, it's take it or leave it, approach.
I am subscribed to one YouTube channel. It's called Casually Comics. Have you heard of it?
No, I have not. Tell me about
Um,
it.
the host, she talks, just like, she reads plenty of Marvel and DC, and she does a lot of video reviews, and she has a lot of insights about just like various characters from those publishers. She recently did an essay on Spider-Man that I really liked, and that it's a perennial argument among readers, but it's the idea that Spider-Man needs to grow up, basically. And
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of what you were touching on kind of, it kind of relates to the idea that there's this eternal now, or you can call it the elastic timeline, or whatever you want, where these characters kind of reach this nebulous age point in adulthood, and then they don't age any further, and because of that, a lot of the types of stories that are told about them get recycled. And so I feel like a lot of the beats that you mentioned, for instance, with Coming Home, like, I feel similarly about, for instance, the Venom saga. I think the first like couple of stories with Venom were really good. They were amazing. I loved them so much. I really felt like, Peter and MJ were both really scared. This was a guy that had it out for him. He was immune to his spider sense. He was a great villain. And then, it was like okay, now we're gonna bring him back because people love him, you know, and then he became a victim of his own success. We had some overexposure. We get Carnage eventually, and it's just like, you know, we're trying to top ourselves over and over again, and it's like you're telling the same type of story over and over again, and you know, if you would let the character, if you would let him grow a little bit older, if you would let him undertake things like fatherhood and stuff like that. And so Casually Comics like kind of addresses a lot of these themes in her essay, and I don't know, I was really like it's something that I had been thinking and feeling but hadn't really seen put into, you know, fairly concrete terms. You know, I know a lot of people argue about this stuff on the internet, and I try not to do as much of that anymore. But you know, it was kind of one of those discussions that I was like, you know, yeah, I agree, and I'm glad I'm not the only person who feels this way.
I think the trouble with Spider-Man in particular is that they aged him up and then they decided to de-age him. You know,
Oh
like
yeah,
they had kind of they had kind of been progressing the character for so long, and like Marvel was right, they have to arrest his development at some point. You know, like I mean, they don't really have to, like they could let him age and die and da, 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 but that's not in their interest, you
right.
know. So like you lock a character in at a certain point. I don't think anybody really cares like how old Batman is, because he's kind of like settled on where he's going to land. You know, like he is like a man in his what, like late 30s, early 40s that has a bunch of
Probably, yeah.
like early 20s and younger people that he is mentoring. You know, like that's where Batman is going to stick, you know, outside of a few, you know, different directions they'll ultimately take him. Like, you know, maybe they'll kill Batman off some, they're not going to kill off Bruce Wayne. He's going to be around forever. And, you know, and the stories aren't really, you know, interested in that, you know, like, uh Spider-Man's a little different. Like we've watched the growth of this guy, and then they decided we're going to move that growth back, you know.
Yeah, they pruned it
And
basically.
yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that choice. Like, and they tried dozens of times to do it, you know, and that it just eventually they had the cojones to say, no, this is for real, you know, like Ben Riley was the first attempt to do it. You know, like
Right.
we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have a Peter Parker that's married and moves to San Francisco with his wife and kid, and etc. And we have a Peter Parker that's Ben Riley in New York that's young and single and yada yada. Right? Like,
Right.
and ultimately that was probably the best choice they could have made, but they just didn't like decide to go through with it, you know, and they've kind of been circling that choice eternally because they're being pulled in these two different directions with the character. And now they're in a double pickle because they've got Miles, who is the young Spider-Man, and it's
Hmm.
like, why are we even kidding around anymore? Like,
Yeah.
uh
I feel like, you know, Peter is kind of at the point where we could put him in, you know, if not a father role, a mentor role, you know?
I will
So,
be very curious because I do believe that there will be a point in the next 10 years where Miles Morales is the Spider-Man that comes to mind first.
oh yeah,
Um,
I think so. Yes.
I think kids are already moving in that direction. And I think these Miles movies are going to cement his legacy even further. And I think at that point, the comics will just kind of have to naturally explore that. And I think they are headed in that direction. I think issue 1000 we're going to get a reunification of Peter and MJ. Like they are slowly working us towards the destination that everybody seems to want them to go. But it's a tough decision. I mean, you're talking about like an iconic character. Like Marvel is in the business of protecting that character, and they thought it is, you know, in their best interest to keep him youthful. Um, and I've disagreed with it, you know, like personally, but I get it. I get the desire to do it.
Oh, no, I do too. I just, I guess, um, I guess I feel, I guess I feel like a lot of the pruning back, was, how to put this diplomatically. Okay, fine, I won't. It was creatively cowardly, you know?
Yeah.
And I guess I'm thinking of One More Day, especially when I kind of speak about that topic. But like, it just kind of felt that not only did you have someone make a decision that I feel that he wouldn't have actually made because he failed to live up to his mantra at that point, but you just had the what I like to call the Diablo ex machina of it all, and I was just like, I mean, I wasn't even a big fan of the marriage at that point, but I was an even bigger critic of how they decided to end it. I was like, that's not how you do something like that, you know?
Well, I mean, to put a pin in it, you know, I think like No Way Home actually shows that One More Day is a good story in search of an ending. Like it is the first, it's the opening chapter of a really good Spider-Man story about
Mm-hmm.
him like having to make the ultimate choice. You know, like all Spider-Man stories are, you know, like good Spider-Man stories are often about choosing between two imperfect things, right? Like I could get the girl or I could save the town. I've got to go dress up and leave her here on the, you know, like, and I'm going to be sacrificing something, right? And like One More Day is a pretty like elevated sacrifice for the character, you
Yes.
know, but there's no redemptive moment, you know, at the end of it, you know, and I think that's like, I don't think they should restore the marriage. What I do think is they need to give that arc its conclusion. I thought that's what Nick Spencer was doing, and I still suspect that's what he was doing before he left to go to Substack. You know, but yeah, I mean, I like we saw One More Day in No Way Home, and it
Yes.
works there because it has a dramatic conclusion, you
Yes.
know, like to his choice.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
like that. I like that perspective on it, actually. I think that's a really good way of putting it, is if you use that story as like a setup, with a redemptive arc, that, yeah, no, I would have far fewer issues with it at that point. So,
I mean, Peter making a mistake, or like, you know, I don't know if I would call him acting selfishly in that moment. Like it's pretty selfless, you know, to be like, I'm willing to give up my marriage to save my aunt's life or whatever. You know, like I don't know how you judge something like that, you know, but I'll let you know when the devil gives me that choice. But uh I would say like, you know, Peter making a mistake is at the heart of all of his, you know, best stories, I think, you know, and then it's about how does he recover from that, or how does he choose to change his life in some way. You
right.
know, like Dan Slott's run is all about like, no one will die because I let Marla Jameson pass away.
Hmm.
You know, or and all of Dan Slott's run echoes that, you know, idea.
Right.
So like One More Day is just like that. It's just yeah, again, there's been no follow through on like what that means emotionally for Peter and MJ, who at this point aren't even aware it happened. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, well, comics is nothing if not a soap opera in print sometimes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, 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 yeah.
um, let's do one more apiece.
So actually, let me say
Oh,
that like on that point,
okay.
you know, we were talking about how many times like you know, Spider-Man No More or If This Be My Destiny has been adapted. But if we really want to talk about iconic stories, One More Day has now been adapted
Oh yeah.
into a very successful Spider-Man, the maybe the most successful Spider-Man movie. And so One More Day is now officially one of the most iconic Spider-Man stories.
Oh yeah, I
Like,
definitely will not. I definitely won't debate you on that. I
yeah,
agree. I have major issues with it, but you're absolutely correct. They adapted it, and they adapted it really, really well in a way. They adapted elements of it, I guess, is probably the best way to put it.
yeah.
Um,
Can a story be so iconically bad that it is ultimately iconic?
I mean, can it transcend the bad so that it reaches iconic? I like it. I like it a
I mean,
lot.
infamous might be the better word. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Um, I'm gonna end my contribution here uh, on the story the night Gwen Stacy died. Um, this is the this is a story that arguably ended in a comic book age. There are some comic book historians who say that the night Gwen Stacy died was the end of the Silver Age, and it's a good story. I have read it. I like it, and it made me sad, but it's one of those stories that I do have a conflict with in the sense that, I mean, I'm never happy when someone dies, you know. But like Dying Wish is still a good story, even though Spider-Man technically dies in it. That isn't the issue. For me, the issue is I found out why, or at least I remember reading why Jerry Conway decided to kill off Gwen Stacy, and that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I was like,
What specifically, that he was bored with the
yeah,
character?
that he was bored with her. I'm like, you could have put her on a bus and sent her away. And like I just felt like it was kind of mean spirited. Like you
Yeah.
really
I
dislike
mean,
her
well,
that much?
give Jerry Conway some credit. He was 19 when he wrote it. But
I
uh,
mean, I
I
don't
don't
know.
disagree. I mean, it is a fridging of a character, and that's never good. I think ultimately it ends up, at least for me, being worth it for the end of issue 122 and the Mary Jane sequence where she returns to console Peter,
Right,
and it enriches that character in that moment in such a profound way. I think with hindsight, it's a really powerful moment. I mean, look, the poor Stacy family just got the crap beat out of them in in the late 60s and 70s Spider-Man comics. But um, I do think it is kind of a watershed moment in comics in regards to, like, no one is safe. Spider-Man's world is safe, is unsafe. And I think it really establishes, like, that whole, like, why his secret identity is important in a way that no comic up to that point had really done. I mean, yes, like, you have, like, the Green Goblin threatening Aunt May in issue 39 or
right.
38, but I don't know, when someone dies, it, like, makes it very definitive, like, what the consequences of Peter's actions as Spider-Man can be.
Right.
So I do think it has thematic value beyond just shock value of, we killed your girlfriend.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. It's just that my issue is with the motivation. you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
this, and I mean, forgive me, Jerry Conway, if you ever listen to this, but this petty motivation is what led to all of this, and that in some ways just blows my mind. It's like, okay, like this is a decision that ended an age, and yes, it enriched other characters, and it drove home a lot of very important themes. He still did it because he didn't like her. you know
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, like, but although personally I find the Gwen Stacy character very boring in the comics, like, she gets a lot of like post-death rosy memorials of how rich of a character she was,
Hmm.
but she was a way less interesting character than Mary Jane, like just flat out, like so if it were up to me, I would have thrown her off the bridge too.
Oh, wow. Okay, fair enough. But I mean, with that said, too, you can make the argument that Gwen Stacy has, especially in the last 10 years, like she's kind of gotten the last laugh in terms of like she's had kind of a resurgence. Even if it's not technically the same Gwen Stacy, it is still Gwen Stacy. The
I mean, yeah, it is Gwen Stacy, but in a very abstract way. I mean, the
hmm
character bears no resemblance to. She bears more resemblance to like Ultimate Gwen Stacy than she does to like who was like a punk rock girl
yeah.
than like the Gwen Stacy of the 1960s comics, who was like who was like a Republican, like she was like really into uh what is the word I'm looking for? Um, she wanted to like fit in, like she was not
She was a
like a
conformist.
head. Yeah, she was a conformist. That's the
Okay.
word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Like I mean, she was smart and intelligent and like I guess like headstrong, but she wasn't like a like countercultural person. Like there are like issues where she like is kind of like a proto-fascist, like in her political beliefs.
Right.
So I mean, like that's a bit unfair to her, but she was kind of hoodwinked by a politician. But like,
Oh yeah, I
she's
read that
not
one.
the like kind of counterculture character that like all these other adaptations have made her into. I think a lot of that honestly comes from like the Emma Stone interpretation of Gwen, which is kind of more like Mary Jane than she is like Gwen. And so ultimately I tend to think like most modern Gwen stuff is really just a like refashioned Mary Jane in many ways. But yeah, she's had the last laugh. And I appreciate that Across the Spider-Verse brings in more of the Gwen Stacy elements
Oh yeah.
to
hmm
her story, whereas like Into the Spider-Verse, they don't even bother introducing her that she's Gwen Stacy. They just say she's just Spider Woman and her name's Gwen. And like if you're in the know, I bet there's a ton of people that watched Into the Spider-Verse and did not put two and two together that that's Gwen Stacy, the girlfriend who died. You know,
Oh, but I'm sure
um,
plenty of those people who saw the movie had friends like you and me who were like, "Oh no, hold on, let me tell you who this is."
oh
Because that
yeah.
was
Well,
definitely
I
me.
write those articles for the Hollywood Reporter, and trust me, like I'm the guy. Yeah.
Which, by the way, I always, whenever you mention that you've got another article out for them, I always try to go find it and read it. So, very,
I
very,
appreciate
very
that.
cool, very cool. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I think this has been a pretty good and a pretty wide-ranging discussion. We're very good at creating tangents and everything. So, but but I mean, honestly, I think that a lot of the stories that we have discussed, I mean, maybe not all of them fit this, but as someone who is a librarian, I'm always interested in trying to get people to read, even if it's not Spider-Man. But these stories, a lot of them are stories that I could say maybe not a starting point, but if you want a good idea of the character or characters in his orbit like coming around at their finest, like here are some of the stories you could read. um and as again, I'm just gonna jump back to One More Day real quick. I mean, that's a story I do not like, but I will not deny that it is very iconic. So
Well, I mean, I got into reading Spider-Man comics because of like those best of books they used to put out. And I do wish they would, everything is collected sequentially now. I would love to get some more books that are just like, here's a few stories throughout the history that could get you into it. That's what I read, and included in there were like Spider-Man No More, The Kid Who Collects, all the things we've talked about today. And I knew about like every decade of the character from a book like that, and I just don't see Marvel putting out anything like that
It'd be really
anymore.
nice if they
So
would. Yeah, no,
yeah.
and I'm sure people like you and I would definitely buy something like that. And I'm pretty sure there are enough people out there who would be like, "Oh, this is like a different iconic or, awesome story from each decade." Like I'm pretty sure that that would have a pretty strong market if they decided to take that risk. So, but I kind of agree with you. I don't see them doing that. Oh, but man, one can wish, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I just wish kids had the opportunity to read the stuff in the way that I did. But there is always like digital stuff, and like Marvel Unlimited is an incredible resource,
Oh yeah.
if you can even begin to figure out how to navigate it. Which if I was like a newcomer, I don't know that I could, but
I mean, it's okay on a
um
phone at least, but
yeah.
but yeah, no, there are occasional issues. I think I wrote them once because I was looking for a very specific Doc Ock story, and it wasn't in there, and I was like, why do you not have Spider-Man Unlimited number 3? Which is funny because now I have that comic and it's actually framed behind me here. It's probably impossible to see, but there are 3 pictures right there, and it's the middle
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna guess that. But yeah.
yeah. So, but I just want to say thank you
Of
for coming onto
course.
the podcast. I had a lot of fun, and I'm probably going to do more segments like this. I'm calling it Spidey Reads, where we talk specifically about the comics and the stories in them and everything. So, if you ever want to ramble about Spider-Man stories with me, agree, you are of course welcome to come back. So, but
Well, I appreciate the invite. I had a great time, and obviously, I wish you and the show the best of luck. And can't wait to share you with my crowd over at Amazing Spider Talk. So, thanks for having me, Tony.
oh, absolutely, and thanks for coming on. Take care. And one moment. There we go. And I believe that brings us to the end of the segment and therefore the end of the show. Once again, my sincere thanks to Dan for coming onto my plucky little podcast and being such an engaging guest. Hopefully, you had as much fun listening to our talk as we had in making it happen. If you enjoyed this episode of the Webline, please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube channel, simply named Spidey Librarian, where the podcast is live streamed regularly and where I maintain a playlist of the live streams. The Webline is also available on audio services, so when you see us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or another such service, please leave us a review and a rating, and if you can, follow us. You can find me on my socials under the name Spidey Librarian on Threads, Instagram, WordPress, and Twitch. Finally, if you'd like to shoot me an email, you can contact me at spideylibrarian@gmail.com, where I'll be happy to hear your thoughts, rants, and ideas. Who knows? Your email might be featured in an upcoming episode. Dan, my wondrous guest for today's episode, is active on Twitter under the handle at SupSpiderTalk, SupSpiderTalk, and his own Spider-Man podcast, The Amazing Spider Talk, which he co-hosts with Mark Giannacchio, is available on YouTube and many of the same podcast services as the Webline. I'll have links to the YouTube channel and some of the podcast services in the show notes and the live stream description. Be sure to join us next Sunday on the Webline, where I'll be teaming up with my friend and webcomics creator Isaiah Broussard for another character deep dive. The subject will be the star of the animated Spider-Verse films himself, Miles Morales. Thank you for listening, and until the next episode, I'll be wishing you a good day. Bye.